Okay, Jake, you've been talking to people all day. One of the things I've heard is that if Democratic lawmakers come out publicly and start saying they don't think that he should be running, that things could change. Are you hearing that from any Democratic lawmakers?
Yeah, but not on the record, and that's what you're referring to, Katie. Let me just break this down for a second. The reality that I heard this morning in the Capitol was that basically the fact is hitting Democratic lawmakers between the eyes that Joe Biden had an audience of 48, 50 million people last night and fell flat on his face. And so if you're a Democratic lawmaker, you want to win the presidency, of course, but you also want to win re-election, and the top of the ticket matters. And there were 200 House Democrats. Not all of them are in competitive seats, but some of them might be finding themselves in more competitive seats if Joe Biden isn't holding his weight. And I think I've heard this up and down from moderates, liberals, the entire spectrum of the House Democratic Caucus. And Katie, what was most stunning to me is the top of the party. Start with Nancy Pelosi. It took her a little while to figure out what she wanted to say. She ignored questions a couple times. We caught up with her outside of the elevator when she was leaving, and she said it was a bad night, but Biden's going to go out and talk about that, and we don't need a new nominee. But the fact that it took her a little bit to figure out what she wanted to say, and listen, I've been covering Nancy Pelosi for a long time. She is not one who has to figure out what she wants to say. She is a very sharp, quick-witted politician. That's number one. Hakeem Jeffries said, he was asked by one of our colleagues, Farnoosh Amiri from the AP, is Biden the best messenger? Hakeem Jeffries is responsible for the re-election of 200 House Democrats, and hopefully, in their view, Democrats believe they could take the majority. He said, I'm not going to talk about the way forward until I hear from Biden at his campaign. He was asked if Biden is the best messenger. You could tell, Katie, that a uneasy pall, let's call it, has fallen over the House Democratic Caucus as they watched that debate and grimaced. I heard from people last night saying it's over. And remember, Katie, I just want to reemphasize this. This is if very few people, with all respect to daytime television, which you and I love, and we hope 50 million people are watching, 48 million people tuned into the debate. Not a fraction of that will see his performance at that Raleigh rally today. So it's interesting that he had a good rally. I'll give him that. But last night's debate was, according to one House Democrat that I talked to, an extinction-level event for Democrats, because they believe if Trump wins the presidency, they are winning the House and they are winning the Senate. And it's going to be an all-Republican Washington once again. Yeah, and that is what Democrats believe is at stake.
David Plouffe last night called it DEFCON 1. Jen, the Democrats have said that, as Jake was mentioning, that it is a bad thing for the Republicans to win, for Donald Trump to win, for Republicans to win the House, to win the Senate. It is bad for democracy. It's bad for rights. I think anybody who saw what happened on January 6th would understand why they would make that argument. If Joe Biden stumbles again in the next few days, few weeks, what should the Democratic Party do?
Well, I guess I would say, this is what I think has happened this morning, because, we're in a, not even hour by hour moment. We're in a 30 minute by 30 minute in terms of how people are reacting to this and the stakes for Biden. I believe that he has weathered the first wave of this storm. There was, I think when Jake talked about Leader Jeffries' statement, I got to tell you, that was a surprise to me, for the House Democratic leader to basically say, I'm going to wait and see how he does, right? But the truth is, and I talked, as you can imagine, as all of us have, I have talked to dozens of people, possible, the kind of people also, just people who might run, people who are talking about people being running, donors, House members, everybody. And the three things that have happened that I think have righted the ship for Biden: he raised $14 million. The campaign did a good job of putting out the fact that focus groups showed that undecided broke his way. So no matter what you all thought of the debate performance, undecided broke his way. You know, they had focus groups that showed that. So that, and then the third thing is the performance right now in North Carolina. And the truth is, the only way this is going to change to have a different nominee is if Joe Biden himself decides that he needs to step aside. And that is not happening. Not after those three things have happened. And after those three things happened, at least in the immediate time frame we're in right now, no one is going to try to push him out, because the threat of what we're facing is it's just too hard. And, you know, Democrats, we like to fuss and we fret. And sometimes that is to our detriment. It's also why we still have a republic, right? Because we don't just blindly follow our leader off a cliff.
But there are people arguing that this is what the Democrats are doing now with President Biden. I respect what the independents said in our focus groups, and you know, and that may be the case going forward. But there are also people out there who are saying that it's not even just about Joe Biden getting elected in November. It's about Joe Biden doing the job for 4 more years, Jen. And if last night was an indicator of how he is off a teleprompter, can he do the job as well as he's done in the last 4 years for the next 4 years? I mean, he's going to be well into his 80s at that point.
Right. And he has done a very good job as president, and like we'll see over the next 5 months if he continues to do a good job as president, and voters will make that decision. But like the question that's before us right now, the Democrats are wrestling with is he still the best person to take Donald Trump on? And I have to tell you, at 3:05 this afternoon, I think people are coming back around to the point that it is not perfect. But you can't, there's just not any scenario for moving forward with another option that seems to end with a Democrat winning in November. And this is still our best chance. And people need to have his back and just move forward. And you talk about the threat that Donald Trump is to democracy, to women. You have his back and you just go. And that, if people thought that there was another way that would result in something better than Joe Biden staying in the race, I think we would see that scenario advancing itself now, and it's not.
Do you agree?
I think the big point I agree with, this is in Joe Biden and Joe Biden's hands. They have to decide whether they should stay in or not. People talk about Joe Biden being stubborn, but where does that cross over into selfishness? And
they're wondering if he's Ruth Bader Ginsburg here.
Well, exactly. And last night's debate performance was abysmal. It could not have been worse. He came out looking like a half zombie, half mole, standing up there, bobbling every single thing coming his way, having glazed looks. It seemed like then today, yes, we get the reset in Raleigh, but you're wondering if we're in need of a March 31st, 1968 moment when Lyndon Johnson said enough and I'm stepping aside. He had to do that, Lyndon Johnson. There wasn't anybody forcing him to. So Joe and Jill Biden have to really believe that this is the best for the country. And I don't know if they have other advisors, that people that could come to him and saying, let's break this open and bring more people into the mix. So he owns the party, and it's going to be up to him what card he plays.
One thing that I was struck by, and we saw this on air, on our own air here at MSNBC, but also I heard this from people in the political world. People love Joe Biden. They think he has done a great job, and he has the numbers to prove it. He has been a good president. He's made bipartisan deals. He's made the economy better. Things are on an upward trajectory, and they like him a lot. But they also feel like it's just time for him to step aside. They feel sadness. They also feel fear, because this idea that Donald Trump is a threat is something the Biden team says, Democrats say, but a lot of people out there who want to vote for the Democrat or vote for anybody but Trump believe that as well. And there's fear that if Joe Biden continues on, that Donald Trump is going to be president.
There is fear. And look, we didn't have the third party aspect last night, but with the one the ABC's doing, you might have John
if
Kennedy
there is that
Jr.
debate
thrown in there. Yeah, if there is that even. And so you're going to see teleprompter Joe Biden. They're just going to do this. Repeat, teleprompter, keep them off talk shows, news shows, don't have anything.
Is that a good idea?
That's where we're at. And if not, he would have to there are a couple scenarios, him stepping down and letting Kamala Harris be president, giving her a big boost and making the history of the first woman president in the United States and creating excitement with women, minorities, et cetera, with that. Or break it open in August, which is tough because there's not one other option to Biden. There are like 15 of them.
1968 was a disaster. Hubert Humphrey was a disaster, and that's what happened after LBJ stepped aside. We're going to talk about 1968 and open conventions in just a minute because I'm curious to see how it would work and whether it could possibly be successful. Thank you so much.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.